So this will be definitely one of the longest response videos. I think maybe that of all of will be still longer. And I'm talking about responses on your comments that you left in the Maelzel's instructions or directions video that I recently published, where I focused on the last paragraph, trying to explain to you the sentence, each single beat or tick forms part of the intended time. And so you left a lot of comments, and I'm promised to go over them one by one, and I'm doing just that. So without further ado, here is the comment left by YZ. Guys, again, just write your name there. I mean, if you have such a comment to make, which I mean, this is not a comment of, just own it, you know, that would be so much easier. Now I have to refer to you as YZ. Why wouldn't you not want to own this? I'm not going to come and knock on your front door, you know. Anyways, digressing. I will read it completely and then I come back in bits and like in parts to comment on that. What does he mean by time? That's a key point to understanding the whole instructions. Fortunately, we don't have to speculate, since clear answer to that is provided by Maelzel himself. By the way, again, the text is probably not written by Maelzel. We don't know that. At least we here don't know that. It's not important anyways. He writes in 4434 and 24 time, which defines time as a whole measure, bar, or specific time signature. Equivalent use of beat and tick repeated in the text dispels any doubt about the meaning of beat, which is one audible sound produced by a single movement of the metronome's pendulum. In the first paragraph, he writes explicitly, these numbers have all reference to a minute of time. When the weight is placed at 50 beats will be obtained in 1 minute. And it's not possible that number of beats would be different than those of actual note values, because later he combines number with the note value, if 50 be the proper number for minim. 607, that's a time code. That would be, of course, when this text would say each single beat is part of a bar. But this text exactly says that. At the end of section 4, quote, it is desirable that the pendulum should be made to strike integral parts of a bar, end of quote. Parts of a bar, not parts, subdivisions of a note value. So each single beat or tick forms a part of the intended time, because each tick represents one note value that is part of the entire measure bar. Each beat, but not the 2 beats produced by the motion from one side to the other. So a final warning was in fact a warning against double beat use. And replacing time with tempo doesn't change anything, certainly not in favor of double beat. Each tick forms a part of the intended tempo, still points firmly and unambiguously to single beat. If quarter note would be the chosen note value, every tick that indicates its length will determine the right speed. The only difference in argumentation between this and the previous video is an omission of a part referring to the note value that was used to indicate allegro, which I suppose is meant to be kept as final proof for those who will watch it. In fact, it's nothing more than another misconception based on conflating 2 different assertions. Generally speaking, it will be found that it's most convenient to mark time in allegros by minims, and in 4/4 the rod should, whenever possible, beat 1 crotchet. Whenever possible has a crucial meaning in this case. It means whenever the tempo is slow enough that you could use a crotchet as a note value. In other cases, like allegros, it's more recommended and convenient to use larger values, like minims. Also, degree of quickness desired for 1 minim or 2 crotchets doesn't mean that the metronome is beating crotchets. It means nothing more that 1 minim, 80 beats per minute, consists out of 2 crotchets, 160 beats per minute, which is a perfect example of a typical speed for an allegro. Okay, so let's start, guys. A lot of things will be just repeated from the previous videos, but it's important that we take this seriously. I would here in this case I want to start with this again, this little introduction, you have to consider reading this text from both perspectives. You cannot go against whole beat here. The text has serious inconsistencies from a single beat perspective, and I'm going over those again here. But whenever you read text of the past, you have to be aware that terminology that you read, you cannot fix it to a certain limited understanding and then, take that limited understanding or meaning of that one term to prove the entire point. You have to, you take a little distance and go through the text from both sides. I'm not saying that this YZ didn't do that, but the point being is you have to test the text really from both sides, and not when whole beat, in your opinion, with this meaning that you give to certain terms falls apart, then by default single beat is what the author meant, doing not the same thing in single beat. Why not applying obvious alternative terms or meaning of terms to a single beat perspective and see if single beat text, a single beat interpretation there holds? So I'm not saying this is manipulation, but it's a kind of manipulative way of writing. And certainly at the end we will see obviously this is not what the text means. It obviously means when it's slow enough, where is that written? Suddenly there is need for real interpretation and speculation in order to make it work, even with you being allowed to restrict the meaning of certain terms to only one word. It's dangerous. Luckily, this is just musical tempo that we are trying to reconstruct, but it's dangerous in the sense that you, without knowing, narrow your view so much that you even don't know that what you actually do is destroy one possible interpretation by just a misinterpretation of the text. I mean, again, we're going over it. This was, by the way, a much less strong introduction than in the older video. I'm taking these videos one by one. So, not saying I'm getting tired from my own voice, hearing repeat myself the same thing over and over again, but a little bit, maybe less. Yes. What does he mean by time? That's a key point to understanding the whole instructions. Yes, I 100% agree with you, but I will repeat right away the same thing as I've said in a few videos. What would you say? Here, fortunately, we don't have to speculate since clear answer to that is provided by, the author himself. He writes in 4, 4, 3, 4, and 2 for time, which defines time as a whole measure bar or specific time signature. Of course, that's what he means at the beginning of the text. When he says, 4, 4 time, he means time signature. And you could say 4 for time, it's measure, it's bar. But he means that's what time means there. Had he written, guys, by the way, for your information, I'm writing this text on a Thursday afternoon at 5 p.m. If you would ask what time it is today when I write, I mean, time then has this clock time. And then he would say, how many times do I have to say this? Times doesn't mean there, bar. And whenever a conductor would give time, he could have written that. Then time doesn't mean time signature, bar. Time means tempo. And in this particular last sentence, it's extremely helpful to have the German text. I don't have it here. I can share it in another video if you want. I mean, I'm not making this up. If you think I'm making this up, then I wonder why you still watch my videos. But anyways, what's the name of this guy? Chandler of Kandler? I should check Lorenz's text there. But in the German translation, it's super helpful. That last sentence here, each single beat or tick forms a part of the intended time, is translated by Zeitmaß. So you don't even have to speculate. It's the Allgemeine Musikalische Zeitung, 1817, I think, February. if you want to look it up. We're not talking about a local teacher living in the countryside who don't know what he's talking about. This is the highest level. Allgemeine musikalische Zeitung, correctly interpreted, translated as tempo, Zeitmaß. So that's just to start the answer. It's not true what you say. The author can say time signature at the beginning and using time in another way. One of the other meanings throughout the text in language matters most of the time. What do I mean with time right now? A word has different meanings and it's possible from the context. That's the entire point, eh? That context is what we try to reconstruct. So when you say single beat is the only way, I don't want to even look into whole beat. Again, not saying that is your point here, but when you do that, well, then you have to restrict that definition to time signature. And whenever the author uses time, it's time signature. Of course, it's time signature. Of course. No, the context of it changes by just changing your perspective. That's the entire nature of the exercise. We don't know that, at least not yet. We're trying to find out what was the perspective of the author. Did he mean single beat? Okay, then we have to restrict the meaning of, or did he mean whole beat? Then we have other interpretations of time, which makes sense. It's not speculative. It's just the context changes there. And as I've shown in the other videos, and I will do it again, when you consider that limited meaning of time, not only it doesn't make sense, it's not up to you to restrict a term that's used at the beginning in connection to a time signature to the entire text. It doesn't make sense, but it leads to major inconsistencies. But I'm coming there and continuing here with your comment. Equivalent use of beat and tick repeated in the text dispels any doubt about the meaning of beat, which is one audible sound produced by single movement of the metronome's pendulum. In the first paragraph, he writes explicitly, these numbers all have reference to a minute of time when the weight is placed that 50-50 beats will be obtained in 1 minute. Yeah, exactly. Even in the Maelzel patent, when he writes, you put the rotor, I don't know what number, and the machine ticks so many times a minute. Yeah, but beat has this double meaning. And it's not me who's saying that. If you deny that, then we don't even have a discussion anymore. Beat has a double meaning. It means single beat, it means whole beat, full swing. Even the notion that we have to explain ourselves today with the term single beat. Whenever physicians talk about beat, they mean full beat. Whenever in the 17th century someone wrote about the tactus and the schlag, they said one schlag. And that equals 2 movements. So this is not even up for debate. But of course, if you by default want that single beat perspective to be true, then you have to restrict that meaning. But it will lead to major inconsistencies. Again, I'll continue. That would be, of course, when this text would say each single beat is part of a bar, but this is exactly says that. So that is clearly pointing to the end here, this passage here. Each single beat or tick forms a part of the intended time. I said in the video, when the author really would have meant here bar, then each single beat can be part of the bar or can still be like a whole beat system. You don't know. It depends on the metronome mark. If I continue here reading, it's actually what he says. So each single beat or tick forms a part of the intended time because each tick represents one note value that is part of the entire measure bar. This is a sentence we'll read again. Each single beat or tick forms a part of the intended time because each tick represents one note value that is part of the entire measure bar. Well, that's possible when indeed here time means bar. That's a possible explanation. But again, it's not possible. Why? If bar here, a time here indeed, and I'm repeating myself, meant bar, then this text falls apart, because his general advice is to give, for instance, for Prestos, metronome marks with whole bars. How can then each tick still be a part of the bar when the metronome mark whole note is the bar? It's not possible. And you can say like, yeah, that's a mistake. Okay, but we mark it as a mistake. We are looking for the most inconsistent reading of this text, which by its nature is not really clear. And it's not clear because it's written from a perspective, yeah, everybody uses the metronome like I'm describing, or that's the general, that's how generally these things with pendulums are used. So the author could have been more clear. I agree with that. But if you say that's in the last sentence here, time means bar, well then Prestus cannot be indicated by whole bars. Scherzus cannot be indicated by dotted half notes. 2/4 time signatures cannot be indicated by half notes. Because in this and in every other case, each single tick, it has to divide that bar. It has to be part of the bar. But how is that possible? So you can say like, this is just a detail. No, it's the essential part of the text. You have to then assume that the author didn't see the inconsistency of this in a text that has been translated twice in German. So nobody saw the inconsistency there. Okay. So a final warning was in fact against double beat use. Well, there I'm puzzled. The metronome was introduced in 1815, and in 1816 in the United Kingdom, in England, people were warning against whole beat. So suddenly whole beat was the general system that apparently this text wanted to change. And it's not Maelzel who wrote this. So you have to explain me where this whole beat use came from and why the author wanted to warn against a whole beat system in 1816. And if that is true, you'll have to prove me that Beethoven knew about this text, because if he didn't, why would he not use the general use of the metronome, which was, you said it yourself now, is whole beat. This text wants to warn against a whole beat use. How much sense does that make? If anyone listening to this right now, leave me in the comment box. How much sense does that mean? You'll have to assume then that the author, it's not Maelzel. Unless someone can prove it's Maelzel. I mean, it would be great. There is 1821, I think this text is repeated in the quarterly musical magazine and journal, something like that. I should have looked it up. I mentioned it in one of the previous answers as well. From that context, it's quite clear that it's not Maelzel who wrote this text. But anyways, you have to make your point there. It's like undermining the entire thing. If whole beat in 1815 was a thing, well, then this article generally, will not have changed that. So it's a weird point, I have to admit. Really, it's a weird point. But anyways. Let me continue. I pressed the wrong button. Here it is. Yeah, here we are. And replacing time with tempo doesn't change anything, certainly not in favor of double beat. Well, absolutely. It absolutely changes in favor of whole beat when we replace time by tempo, again, as the 1817 German author writing for the Allgemeine Musikalische Zeitung, reading this text and interpret it exactly as we do, time by tempo. He did that. He lived 2 blocks away from Beethoven. I'm just kidding. I mean, it's Vienna. I think it was Vienna. Doesn't matter even. He lived in that time, and I think it was Vienna. So a guy living in that time read this text interpreted the text according to us correctly. He said, Zeitmaß. I'm sorry, but you are saying it's not possible. But someone living in Austria in 1817 said, like, yes, hell yeah. If he would come back, he would say, yeah, I mean, what are you talking about? This is time. This is Zeitmaß. And I will show you again here. I told you it's a very boring series of videos. You've heard this a zillion times right now. Each motion down and up is called a time or measure. So what is time? 1829, beating time. What is time? What does an author in that time in England meant by time? And he's not saying in this encyclopedia it's the only meaning, but in this context, time is each motion down and up. And now you can debate like, yeah, but the metronome is going left to right. I'll give you that. But it's hard seeing gravity to have the metronome beat from up and down. It's left to right is the most obvious correlation between the metronome beating and, you know, humans beating time. So I'm sorry, it is just that. And again, when time in that sentence means bar, then the whole text is inconsistent. Then we cannot have metronome marks marked with full notes equaling the bar. Okay, let's continue. Actually, I was planning to make some serious videos after this, but my voice is gone already now. Let me share my screen again. There are some other important points. Let's go over it. Where were we? Each tick forms a part of the intended tempo, still points very firmly and unambiguously to single beat. That's not correct. If each tick forms a part of the intended tempo, it's the instructions for composer how to use the metronome to convert their tempo ideal into a metronome mark. So whenever people say that what is the time, it's the metronome mark. It's the same thing. It's a time measurer also in English. Time measurer. It indicates the time by the metronome mark. So if you say, yeah, but time never can mean metronome mark, well, then a metronome mark is not a tempo indication. I mean, we're coming to a ridiculously narrowing the possible meaning of terminology. And that's, of course, we have to agree then first on the fact that can time, in the context of this text, can time mean simply metronome mark? Can time mean tempo? Can tempo mean in a text on using the metronome for setting a metronome mark? Can time mean tempo means metronome mark? If you say no, well, that's like saying like, you say the sun rises every day, but I deny that. And now you can say like, yeah, but we disagree on this. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't know how to continue and then from this. I'm sorry. Time, tempo means it equals metronome mark. A metronome mark is the intended time, is the intended tempo. And again, we can invite that guy from 1817 of the Allgemeine Musikalische Zeitung. I guess they didn't ask an idiot, writing or translating this text. They asked someone, and maybe I should make a video on this Mr. Candler, I forgot the name, what he was, but I mean, Allgemeine Musikalische Zeitung, I don't know if you read German, but that's like the most important journal or magazine that existed in Beethoven's time and long thereafter. The greatest names worked there. And so in that context, this guy translated time by Zeitmaß. And so the intended Zeitmaß, the intended tempo, in this case can only mean the metronome mark. So no, that's not correct. If that term means tempo, single beat is out of the question. Because then we come into a really inconsistent thing, and you go over there in the next phrase, like probably I'm holding something back. I'm sorry, but this irritates me. I pointed you to the other video. I even gave you the link in the description box. I gave the link at the end of the end cards of the video. So the only thing you had to do was click on the link. So I was not holding back something for final proof. I pointed you to that video. I said at the beginning, I was not about to give a full overview of this text. Only focus at the last paragraph. So, I mean, be serious when you, and I mean, how can I take your point serious from a perspective that you, together with me, wants to find the true reading, the true meaning of that text, if you say things like that? But still, I'm spending 25 minutes now. I'm not saying this is the most brilliant video I've ever made, but the points are there. And again, I'm doing my best to make this series like the most boring series ever made on YouTube, because I'm repeating myself over and over again. I'm repeating myself so many times that I'm getting tired of it myself. And I've even lost my point, but I think I made it already now. So yeah, about the Zeitmaß and the time. Okay, let's continue. Where were we? Each tick forms a part of the intended tempo, still points firmly and unambiguously to single beat. Okay, if quarter note would be the chosen note value, every tick that indicates its length will determine the right speed. I don't get this sentence. If quarter note would be the chosen note value, okay, then we would be in the andante section. Every tick that indicates its length will determine the right speed. Well, that's the whole point, of course. But suddenly, first you deny the option that in this sentence, I mean, here we are, we come to a key. You say first, this intended time can only mean bar. But now, each tick represents the metronome mark, the note value. How is that possible? You can say, okay, yeah, but when that is bar, then each tick represents part of the bar. I mean, yeah, that would be a possibility. But then what would this sentence actually say? That every tick of the metronome represents something that's in the bar? A part of the bar? And if you connect this to this passage, which you think I leave out, I've made very clear already in the previous videos, like, okay, when you have 4/4 time, the rod should, whenever possible, beat 1/4, so 1 crotchet. Every tick is a quarter note. Then he gives the example, this being premised. It's important, guys. It's important. Why? Because the author of this text said, with this in mind. And then he comes to a concrete example where he gives a 4/4 time, an allegro, minims. I mean, there is a connection there, right? Each beat falls in with the degree of quickness desired for 1 minim or 2 crotchets. So you have a metronome. Let's take here the metronome. Alberto said I should do it more often. I said, like, everybody knows the metronome. He said, like, you must be kidding. And actually I should know, because when he came first, he didn't know how to use this. Can you imagine? So here's a metronome. It takes 80. In the shadow, let's take it out of the shadow. Each tick, 1/4 note. And then he says, each beat falls in with the degree of quickness desired for 1 minute. If beat is full beat, and you can say that's not possible, it's absolutely possible. There is no denial. We have tons of definitions. I mean, of course. And even today. Each beat, 1, 2, every time 3, 4 minims, 5 minutes. But whenever possible, the rod should tick, beat, tick, there's tick, the quarter notes. 1/4 note, 2/4 note, 1 and 2 and half note 80, quarter note, half note, quarter note, half note, quarter note. I mean, it's not difficult, eh? It's not difficult. And then this text reads without errors anymore. One would like him, this author, to have been more specific towards us, but can you blame him in 1860 for not caring about the confusion we would have 2 centuries later? This text was written for people in 1816. And so then, from this reading, and then the German translator made the correct decision. Intended time is the desired Zeitmaß, of course. And then of this last sentence that I said has everything to do with the pendulum, because you said this is a warning against whole beat. No, whole beat where? I mean, who was using some sort of pendulum in the time? Weber was making arguments for that, but then came Maelzel. He wasn't happy with it because he had huge plans for his metronome, had chronometer. I don't know what's the name he meant. It was something like that. 1813, Maelzel actually paid him a visit before he went to London to say, forget about your pendulum, I have something way cooler. And then Weber critiqued this, not for the machine, but he said, like, you need one of those to convert the given tempo, the metronome mark, into a frequency per minute. And that's, of course, the cool thing about Maelzel's metronome. You need this. You cannot say 96. Well, 96, what does it mean? You need this to convert it into ticks. Anyways, I'm digressing. So if anything existed before was the pendulum, and the pendulum had a problem in length of rope. When you would have, this is 40, but if you have 50, I believe 50 is 1 meter 43. It's very long, but even 40, I mean, it's like 2 meters and even more. So slow tempi were problematic for pendulums, not to beat them, but just for it to hang above your piano or whatever. And also this is much more accurate than a pendulum, not by its nature, but just by setting the time. Anyways, so if this author had to warn against anything at all, it was against the use of the pendulum, where for slow movements you have to double. It's even, and that's Lorenz, of course, more knowledge, but it's La Chapelle, even going back to the 18th century with those sources in France, that actually described exactly that. For slow movements, you double. You have to count double because, of course, if you want to have 40, the rope gives you 80 at the maximum, so you have to count double. That's what this author wants for you. And by the way, one of the German translations, not the Allgemeine Musikalische Zeitung, but the other one, I believe it's Leipzig, but again, it's not essential, but I can look it up. I mean, one of the other translations made in the same time, by the way, left this sentence out as being completely redundant. So yeah, let's see if I missed something there. We go to the bottom, guys? I promised you that. Generally speaking, it will be found that it's most convenient to mark the time in allegros by minims. Yes, that's what he says. It's also, by the way, true. It's also in correlation with what Maelzel's table would say later. Maelzel would try to change the overview of times by fast, moderate, and slow. And anyways, they're allegros, minims. Beethoven often does that. And in 4/4, that's another quote, the rod should, whenever possible, beat 1 crotchet. So yes, the correct interpretation is here. If you have the metronome beat the quarter notes, then beat means, in this sense, single beat. But I told you that before, a single beat system is secondary of a whole beat system. Whenever you and actually it does say that here, right? Or was another comment? No. So whenever you have the machine define the minims, it defines the minims by the crotchets. So you can say, okay, this is a single beat ticking. No, that depends how your metronome mark is defined. If you define this as quarter note 80, then you have a single beat metronome mark because every quarter note is 1 tick. When you have half note 80, then it's the up and down for every minim indicated in the machine or translated by the machine into quarter notes. Of course, the practical execution of a metronome from a whole beat metronome mark is actually single ticks, huh? That's the whole thing. And you see the author here even struggling. That's why he said each single beat or tick. Why would he explain it with thick, clarify it with thick, if it was so obvious? It was obvious. Nobody would read it wrong, but still he wanted to make it clear. So Mr. YZ continues. Whenever possible has a crucial meaning in this case. It means whenever the tempo is slow enough that you could use a crotchet as a note value. This is just speculation. This is just speculation. Where do I read that whenever the time is slow enough? No. In normal use, 4/4 time, common time, it doesn't give any exceptions, unfortunately. Half note 80 is an absolutely normal tempo. You actually say it yourself, and it's correct. You have slower, you have faster, but that's kind of middle tempo in that time for Allegro. Maybe even already Allegro, I don't know. Doesn't matter, but that's correct. But he never says like whenever the tempo is slow enough. If you need that to clarify this text or to interpret this text without errors from a single beat perspective, then you're going very far. Give that chance to a whole beat interpretation, and you don't need that. You don't need that. Still, the text is not as clear and written from a perspective of giving us here today in 2022 information, but it's clear enough from a whole beat perspective. I would say 9 out of 10 from a single beat perspective, even. Not usable. Not usable. Well, I hope I make my case here, huh? And again, sometimes I'm a little irritated by seeing... Guys, when you comment on my videos, and certainly here, when we go into detail, summarize my position. Let me know that you know what I mean. Let me know that you went over this with the same mindset as I do, that you see my point, validate the strong points, and challenge the weak points. And I will come back to that. I have not the answers to everything. The only thing is you have to start from respecting what the other side is actually seeing in this text, and do that always. I mean, I can just give you that as advice. You do whatever you want with that, but define the problem for you. If there is no problem for you to solve, if the metronome marks in general do not pose any problem, then you'll have to show me that. And I know many of you are freaking out when I say, like, in the time at Piano Pad, I mean, I kept saying to him in the comment boxes, you keep turning in circles, that everything is nonsense, and the whole single beat doesn't create any problems. Show me that. And the reason he freaked out, I mean, I'm exposing a little bit, I said that in the video, our conversation, was that I asked him when we had Zoom calls, you're sitting at the piano, show me. And he said, it's not fair. You can play everything in whole beat, but then can I demonstrate my theory? Well, I said, then you have a problem, because metronome marks are meant to be playable exact tempo indications, not about. Even the most problematic ones like Czerny, he says it in the preface. The goal is to practice them until you can play them in the marked tempo. Unless he didn't mean metronome mark by that. I think he even used metronome mark or tempo, I don't know. So you have to first define the problem. If there is not a problem, you have to show me there is no problem. If there is a problem, then you have to start from, because when this text is a clear single beat definition, well, then it's the start for the most useless revolution in history. We can throw this on in the waste paper bin. I mean, what do you need it for? I'm sorry, Beethoven and all the other composers who were screaming for the metronome to come. You give metronome marks that we cannot play, so get rid of that. We follow our taste. Doesn't make sense, right? Again, the book will have a selection of 100 19th century quotes, all saying the same thing. A metronome mark gives the opportunity of the composer. The metronome gives the opportunity to composer to set the ideal tempo that he has in mind for his compositions. And you can say, like, Andras Schäfer, we'll come back to that in another video, like, yeah, that's mental time. Let me go on. Before you go to deflective answers, you have to first see if the obvious doesn't work. And if that changes a lot of what you're used to today, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? I would say it's the most exciting thing to do. I mean, guys, if you're here, just realize we have still a very small channel, eh? So how many musicians in this world have never heard of whole beat, have never heard of a metronome solution, have never heard of all of that? You have. I'm giving it to you for free. Do something with it. It's so exciting. We're going back in history. And as I see it, there is no other solution. Forget about this text, forget about old text, forget about the book we're going to write. Just take the machine and a handful of metronome metronome definitions. It takes you 10 minutes to go on IMSLP to find treatises of Hummel. I mean, there are so many books written in the 19th century on musical education, and most of them have something with the metronome. And they all say the same thing. There's no one, not a single one saying like the metronome, forget about it. I mean, these tempi are so fast, we cannot play them. And so once you have that, don't read the book. It's not necessary. Just find a solution. And just by staring at the machine for 5 minutes, no, 5 seconds, you just have... What are the possibilities? Not so many, I would say. Okay, guys, I told you there was going to be a long answer. Not going to do that for all the videos, going in depth in your comments, but in this one, I thought it was necessary. So I think I had the most important ones. If I missed, you just repeat your comment in the next one. There is still one of Johan, but I think it's more generic in nature of questioning. Here it is, questioning the text. He says, what's the original? It's not so important because these people were not so were not idiots. Terminology is important to see in a language, but when someone interpreted that in another language, it's what we have. And when both interpretations match, well, it's incredible that we have that. So he questions the exactness and the scientific meaning of the text, which is absolutely correct. Okay. I'm just scrolling through here. There are some other comments here. I will see if I go over one of those, but for today I'm pretty tired responding to that. And yeah, again, I hope that was clarifying. I hope you understood my points and especially your input. Be aware of what you want to prove and from which position you want to do it. See the problem, mark the problem, write it down. Write it down, just on a piece of paper. What is actually the problem here? What is Wim talking about? Do we have a problem? Do I see a problem? Or is there not a problem? And if you say no, you take a metronome and you take score and you go to play. You don't have to share that with me. I don't care what you think. Really, I don't care. I love sharing this with you. I don't have to do this. Why do people share this? Why do people teach? It's a human connection that I'm enjoying so much. Even I'm talking now right now to a camera. I'm talking to you. But do that. Sit down at the piano. And then start thinking. And if everything falls apart like your whole understanding of music as today, doesn't matter. You have a choice. You don't have to follow that. But don't mix the two together. I mean, through each other. Well, would you say that? Just don't mix it. It's not the fear of losing what you like, current performance practice, with what potentially was the historical truth. Don't use one with the other. If you have to separate that, it will be like that in the future. We will have two ways of playing, whole beat and mainstream. And maybe whole beat will become mainstream, I don't know. But the modern, evolved way of playing will still exist. A pianist Valentina Lesitsa is not going to give up her virtuosity in Beethoven. And there is still an audience that is maybe not sensible enough to go back, or just by principle doesn't want to go back. We evolved since Beethoven. If that's what you think, then you go to Lesitsa's concert. But you cannot use the preference for that way of playing to impose it on what historically might have been the case. Okay, having said that, I'm getting terrible in this. 45 minutes, incredible. 20 minutes a while ago I thought was long, but 45 minutes is just a record for me. Maybe the video on Alexander Bonus was longer, but that had more different kind of content and context perhaps than this one. Lieber Maelzel and Maelzel Directions and lieber Leute here. Thanks for watching. Definitely we see each other soon again.